Hello and welcome to Billing in Soluno. In this recorded class, we will take a look at the aspects of billing in the Soluno software, from requesting the invoice, making edits in the review, finalizing invoices, and then some of the things you perform after billing, such as past due notices and making adjustments to an invoice. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and switch over to a copy of Soluno and let's begin. We're going to go to the main toolbar and we're going to click on this icon here, the envelope with a $sign in it. That is where the billing will take place. Click it, and then you will see a series of tabs. The first three tabs are the billing process, from requesting the invoices to reviewing and editing to finalizing them. The last three tabs are things you can do after billing, like your adjustments to an invoice or past due statements. And for those of you that email, the ability to check those emails that are on hold and review them before sending them out. Now, again, you may not see all of these tabs based on security settings. I'm logged in as an admin, so I can show you everything. But if your security is locked down so you can't access certain features, you may not see certain tabs. There is one tab that is actually controlled by the admin, and that's that Release Invoice tab. The Release Invoice tab is a secondary review tab. You can't make edits on any of the invoices in this tab. It's purely for a second team to review the already made edits and determine whether they want to finalize those invoices or send them back to review for more edits. This is generally used by larger law firms. So for smaller firms, you may turn this tab off completely because it's just not necessary. So if you don't see the Release Invoice tab, there's a good chance your firm just doesn't use it and they just turned it off because there's no need for it. Because I can finalize invoices directly from the Review Charges tab, and I will show you that today. Well, let's go ahead and start with the first tab, Request Invoice, and how do we do an invoice run? The first line is all about the dates we're going to use for the invoice. The first field is the date field, date of the invoice. Now, I know it's late July, but I'm going to pretend I'm doing my June billing. And I want to date my invoices July 1st. So I can click in this field and backdate that invoice to July 1st. Now, when I click or tab out of that field, you'll notice these next two fields are underlined in red. It doesn't like these dates. So for the entries up to, these are your time and disbursement entries, and receipts and trust up to, which are your payments and trust transactions, these dates cannot be after the invoice date. They can be any date up to and including the invoice date, but not after. Now, for me, that's not a problem because I'm billing for June, so I'm switching these dates anyway to June 30th. And you'll even notice when I click in the calendar, it whites out all the dates after the invoice date, so you can't choose a date after it. But again, based on my billing preference, I'm good to go. I'm going to run it through July 1st, and I'm billing through June 30th. The next line is all about which files do you want to bill. If I leave this line as is and touch nothing, I will do a mass bill run and bill all eligible files in my database. And for some smaller firms, that might be how you bill. But otherwise, you may want to narrow down that scope. So you could bill by an individual file, an individual contact and all their associated files, by area of practice if your firm has multiple areas of practice, by department if you've set up multiple departments. You could bill by a responsible attorney and just pull in all the files that they're responsible for. And the last one's a little trickier, the bill frequency. The default is set to automatic. So what that is doing is looking at the file group assigned to the file. In that file group, there's a bill frequency setting. I'm going to show it to you. Just keep in mind this is an admin setting, so you might not be able to access this yourself. But just so you get an idea of what this bill frequency is for, I want to show you the setting. I go to my admin settings, I go to contact case file, I go to file groups. Got these file groups that you assign to your files. I'm just going to open up the default file group. Under the invoicing section is the bill frequency. So the usual bill frequencies are include, which means every time I do a bill run, it would pull the file associated with this file group into the bill run. Exclude means don't ever pull that file into a bill run unless I specifically choose that file. It's usually used for contingency cases. Monthly just means when I do a bill run, if I bill multiple times throughout the month, only pull that file in once during the calendar month. Quarterly, bill it only once a quarter. Semi-annual or annual. So those are the normal selections which can tell us when we should pull it into a bill run. But underneath that are 15 user settings. This is a way that if you've got a group of files that you bill irregularly or only at certain times, and you want to be able to pull those files in a specific bill run, you could set a file group to like user 1 and assign this file group to those files. So then when it's time to bill, I can tell it, go through my files and only pull those files that are set to the user 1 frequency. So that's why we see this field here that might seem a little unusual compared to the other fields, because it really is another way to narrow down which files you're going to bill in this bill run. Most of the time, though, you'll probably leave it to automatic and use these user sections for specific cases. Then we have some additional options. When you bill, you have the ability to put a time or expense entry on hold and not bill it. But this option, you can turn it on and force us to include those held charges on a bill. You can include files that only have a trust balance. Maybe you just want to go through and bill those files you know you can transfer money from trust to operating to refill your coffers. So you can tell it, only include files in this bill run that have money in their trust account. You can force a bill display. So every file has a bill group assigned to it that has a specific bill display. Some firms may have 1 or 2 different displays. Others may have 10, 20, 30 displays. With this option, you can force a specific display on all the bills that you're about to bill. Just click in the box and choose a specific display. And it'll override the settings at the file level, and all bills will use this bill display. Same with the force case file group. One of the things the file group can control is the trust account money's coming from and the operating account the money's going to in a trust transfer. So if you are going to do transfer at the time of billing, for example, and you want to make sure all the money's pulled from a specific trust account and goes to a specific operating account and override the settings on the files, you could choose a file group that has that specific trust and operating group set up. This is not an alternative option for selecting files. So if I were to choose the file group default, that doesn't mean, oh, I'm just going to pull in the files using that file group. That's not how this works. It forces the settings of this file group onto all the files that you're about to bill and overrides the file group assigned to them. So don't make that mistake. At the bottom is the action we're going to do when we do the bill run. The default action is we're going to send these all to the Review Charges tab so that we can review them and make our edits. The other options you have is send a release. That would bypass the Review Charges and throw them in the Release Invoice tab. Again, bearing in mind, you can't edit invoices under the Release Invoice tab, so you'd only do that if you know your bills don't need any edits, and if you're using this tab. Third option is to determine billable status. I'm going to come back to that and show you what that is in just a moment. First, let's do our bill run. So I'm going to send these to review, and I'm going to do a mass bill run. which means I'm leaving this and I'm going to bill all eligible files. I'm going to reset these dates because they've changed since I've been playing with the settings. And then I'm going to click process to send them all to review. Now, if you forget to make a selection here and you click process, we will warn you, hey, you're about to bill all eligible files. Are you sure you want to continue? For you larger firms, it may take a while for the bills to generate because you've got maybe thousands of files to go through. Luckily, I have a small training database. This won't take me long. So I'm going to go ahead and do a mass bill run. It's now going to go through all my files based on the settings I selected here, mainly the date settings, find the files that are eligible for billing, create the pre-bills, and move me over to the Review Charges tab. And there it goes. So these are all the bills that were generated that I can now review to make my edits. Before we begin the edits, there's a few more things I want to show you on the Request Invoice tab. So first off, I'm going to undo one of these invoices. Let me sort these by file, and I'm going to undo this file 6-001. So if there is a file in this list that you decide not to bill, just tag the file, go down to the actions, and tell it to undo the invoice. When we undo an invoice, it deletes the invoice and puts all the entries back into WIP. So I'm going to process this. I'm going to undo the invoice. Maybe you're looking at this list and you're thinking to yourself, I should have more files and I should have more bills. Why don't I have more bills in this list? Well, that's where that Determine Billable Status option comes into play. So I'm going to go back to Request Invoice. I'm going to put in the same dates that I had, July 1st through June 30th. I'm going to do another mass bill run, except this time I want to determine billable status. By using the same settings and choosing Determine Billable Status, it'll go through and show me which files are eligible for billing and which files it won't bill. So based on what I've done, when it shows me which bills are available to bill, one file should come up, the file that I deleted from the Review Charges tab. So let's see what happens when I process and determine billable status. Again, it will warn me about a mass invoice run. And now the screen looks a little bit different. So at the top, any files that should be billable will pop up, and that one file that I undid should pop there. Then underneath will be all the files that it didn't generate bills for. And there it is. So here's that 6-001 that I undid earlier. It meets the criteria, so it says we'll create a bill for that. Down below, though, are all my other files and the reason why there was no bill created. So for file 10-001, there was no new charges. Maybe it's a brand new case I haven't started work on yet, so there's nothing to bill. We didn't create an invoice. For 10-002, well, there wasn't enough new charges. I have a setting in one of my bill groups that if there's not at least $1,000 in total charges, new charges, don't create a bill. So they haven't met that threshold yet. A little further down, insufficient new fees. So for Sarah, her file is set that if I don't have at least $500 in fees on the invoice, don't create the bill. So these are the different reasons why these particular files didn't create an invoice. In this case, it does not meet billing frequency parameters. More than likely, I've got that file 6-007 set to exclude, so it never gets pulled into a bill run because that's a contingency case. Now, if you want, let me scroll back to the top of this list. Maybe I decide I don't care. I want to create bills for these two anyway, so I can force Soluno to do so. Just say include it in the bill run anyway by tagging the box and making it green. The last button, excluded files. Click that button. And we'll see some files weren't included because they're already in progress. They're already in the Review Charges tab or the Release Invoice tab. So I was not going to create a new bill for those that I'm already looking at. Then these 3 files, I've already created invoices that are dated either July 1st or after July 1st. Because we will not allow you to create an invoice and backdate it prior to an already created invoice for that file. So these 3 files, I actually created invoices for them last week. So since they're dated after July 1st, it will not create bills for those 3 files. So I still want to create that bill, and I'm going to force those 2 in. And I just click Send to Review Charges, and it moves those files over to the Review Charges tab. Give it a moment, and it will update the tab. And then there's that file 10-001 and 10-002 that I forced over. And it recreated the invoice for 6-001 that I undid just a few minutes ago. There's a couple more features available over on Request Invoice. If you specify a specific file or contact, you'll have a 4th option under Action, which is a settlement statement. So maybe contact number 6, Robert Snow, contacts the firm and says, I want you to send me a statement of everything you've billed me since the 1st of this year. I want to see all the actual billed items, my payments, etc. since January 1st, 2023. We can do that with a settlement statement. So he's got multiple files, so he wants to see all the files I've worked on and everything I've billed since January 1st. So I choose his contact instead of each individual file. Down at the bottom, I choose Settlement Statement. I then click Process to run it. Now I got a couple questions I can answer. Some extra filters. So he said he just wanted his billing since January 1st. So I can tell it, go ahead and ignore everything prior to January 1st, 2023. He just wants to see what he's been billed this year. And he specifically said just what's been billed. So I only want to include the entries that I've actually invoiced. I don't want to see unbilled entries in this statement. And I click OK to generate the settlement statement. So take a minute or two because it's going through all his files. And then here's my settlement statement. So the invoice number will say settlement. So here's Frost Industries contact. Here's file 6-004 and all the time I've billed since January 1st. The first billable entry for him was January 19th on this file. Here's all the fees I billed on that file and the total of the fees since January 1st. Here's his next file. Everything I've billed since January 1st on that file. Total fees. And then file 6001, everything I billed on that file. And then the total fees. This will be a little bit longer because I use this file quite a bit. Here's what I've billed since January 1st. This other file. And after all the fees are shown, now all the expenses for each individual file with the totals. After that, all the payments I've gotten from Mr. Snow and which files they were applied to. Then after we do the payments, the last section of the bill is his trust statement with all the trust transactions since January 1st. That's why you might see negative numbers, because we're not taking into account anything prior to January 1st for these trust balances. It's just the trust transactions as they've appeared since January 1st. This settlement statement is not saved anywhere in Soluno, so if you want to keep a copy, make sure you either download it, print it, or you can just rerun the settlement statement in the future. All right, last thing I'll show you on this tab, then we'll move on to edits, is if you input a specific file, You have one additional action, which is to just finalize the bill. So if you need to get a bill out the door, you've already done your review of the time and expense entries. You can just pull the file up and request invoice and automatically send it to finalize and post the final bill right from the screen. So those are the different options available for request invoice. When you're ready to do your edits, we'll go to the Review Charges tab. And there's a couple different ways you can do edits here. So this is my entire firm. Right now, I just want to look at my files, the ones I'm responsible for. So at the top on some of these columns, we have some filters. So if we're responsible, I can filter it down to my initials. Now I've got just my files on the screen. If I have access to this screen, I can review the file right on the screen from here. Down at the bottom, you'll see this little blue attachment icon. If you click it, starting with the top of the list, it'll pop the invoice up on your screen for review. Not in PDF format, but in Soluno. Now I can just look at the invoices from here. Down below, I've got some options. I can actually finalize an invoice right from the screen if I'm the reviewer and I have the ability to finalize. Or I can send a release if I'm using the Release Invoice tab. I do my look over and then I send it to release for the second team to look it over. Or I can decide, you know what, I'm not going to bill this. This is that 10-001 that really didn't meet the billing criteria. There's really not a reason to bill it. So I can click Undo Invoice. It'll delete that invoice, and if there was time or expense, it would put that all back into WIP. Same with this one. Don't need it, so I'll undo the invoice. And now you just go through and make your review. So in this one, I've got some expenses. If the expenses were entered under the Expense tab, then you can come in and you can make adjustments to them. Just click on the expense to open it up. So in this case, my TAF should only be $15. So someone overcharged, so I reduce the amount. Click Save. Just telling me that I should have already completed the TAF, so I'm going to acknowledge that. And it updates it to $15. Normally you don't have two TAFs on a file for those of you in British Columbia. Or the transaction levy, usually in Ontario. That transaction levy should actually be $65 because it's real estate. So I'm going to reduce it to $65. Click on Save, and it updates the entry and updates my bill. So as long as the expense was entered under the Expense tab, you can edit it here on the screen. And I can click Next to move on to my next invoice. Let's find some with some time entries this time. Here we go. You can also edit time entries by clicking on the time entry. Maybe this review documents, instead of 1.5, that should only been 0.5. Maybe Allison, the timekeeper, mistyped it. So I click on the time entry and change that to 0.5. If you need to update the explanation, maybe you want to put their name. And just save. That'll update the time entry and then update the pre-bill with the new time entry changes. There it is, 0.5 R13. So you can make minor edits directly on this screen. And then you would just continue to go through and review your invoices. If you want to get back to the list of invoices, then down to the bottom right, you'll see the grid icon. Click it, and it'll take you back to the list of the invoices. I can clear the filter. In my database, sometimes when I click that clear filter, it doesn't always clear like it should, if that ever happens to you, just quickly switch tabs and it'll refilter correctly for you if that happens. Hopefully, it does not happen. If you prefer to actually have a paper copy of the invoice to distribute out to your timekeepers, you can do that as well. You'll notice the PDF icon over to the right. You can print individual invoices by clicking the PDF. If you need to distribute them all as PDF, then you can click the PDF icon at the top, which will then create one PDF with all the bills in it for you to print and distribute. Now, a couple things you can do. First, maybe you want to sort them before you print the PDF, because right now, if I'm distributing my responsible, I've got initials all over the place. So you might want to click on this column first to sort them, then click the PDF icon. So when it prints the PDF, it'll put them all in that order. And then which preview do you want to see the invoice in? The final one, which is what the client would see if you sent them the invoice, or the draft version, which may include additional data fields for your timekeepers to review. Depends on your setup and how the bill displays were created. Your draft and your final may look the same, or your draft may have additional data that your clients normally wouldn't see. And just click it to tell us which version to generate. And then let the PDF generate. It's going to take a little time because there's a lot of files. Now, the other way to do it, instead of me doing the entire list and then having to find where DDC ends and DOS begins, is I can just first do DDC, print all those, exit it, and then do DOS for David, print all David's, then exit it, and then do MAH. So there's multiple ways you can generate that giant PDF to make it easier to print and distribute. So whichever way works best for you. Give this another minute to generate the PDF. And then here's the final PDF. Has all the invoices in it. So here's all mine. There's my signature. Me. So first does all mine. And after it goes through me, that should pull up David's. Unfortunately, I have quite a few. Yep, there's David's. And then after David's, we'll have Michael's. Distribute the PDFs out and let your timekeepers make their edits. Now, they can do the edits one of two ways. They can handwrite the edits on the printed out bills and pass them back to whoever makes the edits for them. Or if they don't want to handwrite on the PDFs, over on the right, you'll see these comment bubbles. If they have access to the screen as they're reviewing their PDFs, instead of marking them up, maybe they want to make a change to this 6-004 file. So they can just click on the comment bubble and enter what they want done here. So I could type something like missing telephone conference with client from June 15th, 4.3 for DDC. And maybe it's missing an expense, missing courier charge for June 28th for $76.99. So they can just type in what notes they want the editors to make when they review and edit the invoice. And once they've got all their changes, they can click on Save and then close out the note. Now, if you're the editor for those people, when you come in, you'll notice anything with a filled-in comment bubble has edits. So you know which ones you have to edit. If the rest don't have edits, then that should mean they're good to go. So either mark up the PDFs that were passed out and they'll pass them back, or if they have access to this screen, they can just put their edits in these comment bubbles to make it easier to determine which ones you have to edit. When it's time to make your edits, you can make your edits with the pencil icon. And this editing feature gives you the most ability to edit invoices. I'm going to open up this comment bubble so I can see what I need to make. I'm going to drag this off screen so it's not clogging up while we're trying to make our edit so you can see everything. And then I will click on the edit pencil to open this invoice for editing. Here we see the time section. I can expand it out to see the time entries. If I needed to edit an existing time entry, then you'll see there's an edit pencil next to each time entry, and I can edit the existing time entry. Just click on edit and make your changes. Well, in this instance, I'm missing a time entry. Well, instead of going back out, adding the time entry, regenerating the pre-bill, I can just go up to the word time, and our quick entry icon is right next to it. Click the lightning bolt icon and tell it you're entering a missing time entry. This is from June 15th. I was the fee earner. It was a telephone call with client. And I spent 0.3 on it. Click save, and we'll add it to the list and add it to the bill. Now, if for some reason you didn't want to bill one of these items, just uncheck the box next to it to remove it from the bill. So we'll see my fees will be reduced. Uncheck, and they go down. And this will just be available for my next bill run. If you have a duplicate item, then you can delete an item from the screen. The hamburger icon, you can turn on additional information. Like if you need to see the internal note about why a change was made, you can add that note feature here. Once you're done with the time, same thing with the expense. I can edit existing expense entries. Or if I'm missing one like this one is, click on the little lightning bolt to enter a missing expense entry. This is a courier charge for $76.99. And then save to add the expense. Actually, that was supposed to be dated June 28th, so I can go back in and click edit and update the date. If there are any retainers to show, they would show up here, and it would just be for informational purposes only. You wouldn't be able to change anything. Like here, I can see trust transactions, but I can't actually change them. And I can see where the balance forward is coming from. So these are all the invoices that make up this balance forward. And click OK when you're done. For this 6001 file, which I know I have a lot of stuff on, if I go to the expenses, you'll see I have some stuff from July. I could actually turn that on and bill it if I wanted to. But I did want to show you something like this filing fee that was probably a hard cost. I do have the ability to edit. It'll take me out to the check, and I can make edits to the check if necessary, if someone put in the wrong amount, etc. And it's just telling me that entry was on a requested invoice, which I know because I'm editing from that requested invoice. But the edit pencil will give you the greatest editing ability for an invoice. A couple more edits you can do here. Maybe on this file, total fees was $22.80, but I decide I'm just going to bill them $2,000, flat fee of $2,000 for the total. I can come in here and I can change that to be $2,000. And then it's going to say, okay, we can do that. What do you want to do with the extra amount that you're writing off? I would choose an appropriate task code. I'm going to do a write down, and then I can put in why I did it. Maybe it's just a courtesy discount for me. And click OK. Now, I don't know if you caught it in time, but this column is for Canada, is usually the taxes you're charged. Well, when I wrote this down, it automatically reduced the taxes for me to reflect the new total of fees. And if I now do a preview of this invoice, it will show the discount to the client. So there was the original amount, $22.80. There's a $280 I wrote off. There's my courtesy discount that I typed in. So my client's only paying $2,000 in fees for this invoice. You could also do the same thing with expense. I don't see it happening often, if ever. So if you wanted to write down the expenses, you could. But then again, you'd have to tell us why you're writing it down and which GL account you want that to take effect in. And you could see right there, the total in taxes, if I hit this little ellipses, was 107.60 in GST, 150.64 for a total of 258.24 in tax. When I wrote this down to 100, the tax will go down as well. Now it's 252 even. And if I cancel out of this, it'll go back up. So it's quick, but it does update the taxes for you. As an FYI, when you do the write down of fees, for those of you interested in how it's going to do that write down allocation, that's based on your file setting. It's either going to prorate the write down amongst the working timekeepers, or it'll just write down the responsible attorney's time. That is a file setting. That'll tell us what to do when you write down fees during the edit process. Another setting you may have is for those of you who are allowed to collect trust at the time of billing, it may automatically apply the trust towards the invoice. Now, some people love it to do that. Others prefer to manually move the money during the billing process, which you can do. As you can see, I've got this column called Trust Available that shows me how much I can apply in trust for each of these invoices. If you don't see this column, again, you can click the hamburger icon, little 3 bars in the upper right, and turn that column on. So it might be turned off for you. You might not see it. So you can always turn it on to see how much they have in their trust account to apply to the current invoice. Now, a word of caution, this is not necessarily the total they have in their trust account. When you transfer trust at the time of billing, we only allow you to apply trust to new charges only, not to any previous balance due. So this first one's a good example. He had a balance forward of $1,725. He has new charges of $2,500 in fees, no disbursements for $375 in tax. So the total of the invoice for the fees and the disbursements is $2,875. But his balance forward would bring that up an extra $1,725. But the trust available is telling me you can only transfer $2,875 because that's the total of the new charges, the fees plus the tax. We can't apply it to the balance forward. He actually has more in his trust account. He could cover the balance forward if we allowed you to do that trust at the time of billing, but we don't. You can only do that after billing's been completed. But if you want to confirm how much he actually has in his trust account, remember, that's not the number in his trust. That's the max you can apply on this invoice. So if you go over to the left and click on this eye icon, you can go to their file And you can see, oh, he actually has $5,000 in his trust. So I know that sometimes may confuse people because they see a lower amount here when they know that client has more money in their trust account. But that's because all we're saying is the max you can apply to this invoice is that 2875. And you would manually type it in here to do the trust transfer when you finalize the bill. So for those of you that are allowed to transfer trust at the time of billing and you don't have your file set to do it automatically, then you can manually type in how much trust you want to transfer. And this column will show you the trust available that you can transfer at the time of billing for this file for new charges only. Last thing, you can also change the date here. So maybe these bills have been sitting here for a while and we want the date of the invoice to reflect the actual date. So maybe it's a week later and I want to move that date to the 8th. I can do that. You can always move this date closer to the actual date of billing. What you can't do is move it back. You can move it forward, but not back. I can't move it beyond June 30th because June 30th was my cutoff date for charges. And he tells you, no, the invoice date cannot be before the cutoff date for entries or receipts. So even June 30th doesn't work on this one for some reason. It should have. Pretty sure I set him to June 30th. Normally I can do that, but I must have done something a little wrong in the system. But just know this date cannot be prior to the cutoff date of charges and payment and trust transactions. So you can't move the date backwards, but you can move the date forwards if need be. Now again, depending on your setup, if you don't have the release invoice tab, then down here, the default action is going to be to finalize and post your invoices. Otherwise, if you do have that tab, the default is to move it to send a release. And I will show you send a release just so you're aware of what it is. And I click on process, because I'm going to move them to the send a release tab. And again, generally used by large firms that are doing a second review. So move them over to the release invoice tab. And then whoever does the secondary review would come in and they can either open up the PDF to look at it, or they can look at the comments. So here's that comment. It's really maybe hard to see, but this is filled in. It's a light blue. So there's the comments I made earlier. I just verify those edits were made. And if I verify the edits were made, I can then finalize from this tab. But I can't make any actual edits here. If I wanted to make edits, then I have to move them back to the Review Charges tab. Hence, your firm may turn this off completely if this tab is not needed. I think the majority of my firms really don't use that tab, so I will move these back to send back to review, process it, and send them back here to Review Charges. So generally, most firms will probably finalize right from here. Again, if there's any bills you decide not to bill, you can tag them and you can go ahead and undo the invoice. It just deletes the invoice and puts everything back into WIP. Otherwise, finalize it. That's what finishes the billing cycle. I'm going to tag everything to finalize all my bills. Make sure finalize is selected here. Then you process them to post the bills. That'll create the paper copies, the PDFs for you to mail out. For those of you that do electronic billing, it'll create the zip file with your electronic bills for uploading. And for those of you that email your bills, it'll generate and send out the emails to your clients with their bill. I'm going to go ahead and click Process to finalize. And then just wait for it to finish the process. And once it's done, it'll pop up the zip file that I need, the PDF for me to mail out, and my emails will go out the door. And then there they are. So down below, here's my downloaded zip file for my electronic billing. And here's my electronic bills for me to upload to my third-party companies for e-billing. Here are my paper copies. Usually electronic bills also generate a PDF for review. And I've noticed that there are some third-party companies that not only do you submit the electronic bill, but they want the PDF copy as well. So this would be the PDF copy you could submit to them. Otherwise, for regular bills, it just won't have that little disclaimer at the top, and this is the bill I would send out to my clients. And my other ones were emailed out directly to the client. So those first 3 tabs are the billing process, from requesting the invoice to making your edits, and depending on which tab you want to use, finalizing and posting your invoices. The last 3 tabs are things you normally do after billing has been completed. The first tab is to make adjustments to invoices. So if a client gets an invoice, raises a fuss about something, and you decide to make an adjustment to it, you can do it here. If you know the invoice number, just stick it in here and find the invoice. I don't know the invoice number because I'm making this up for training, so let me just find an invoice for a file. And we'll use their April invoice, 1841. So I pull up that invoice, and there's a list of all the charges on it. Now, if I want to reduce the fees, I can do it one of 2 ways. Maybe I'm just going to make this an even 10,000. So I write it down, minus 1,325. Writes it down to 10. I still need a task code. So I'm going to just choose write down. And then here, if I need that explanation to appear on the client's bill, wrote down after discussion with client. So that's the one way to write down fees. It will then follow the rules I talked about earlier about writing down fees. It'll either prorate that write down amongst all the working timekeepers, or it'll write down the responsible attorney's fees. Again, depends on your file setting. What if you want to control who takes the hit on their fees? Well, if that's the case, don't make the change here. Go to the Allocations tab, which you can then control the fee write down. So it looks like I billed the most on this file, so I'll take the bigger hit, and I'll take $1,000 for my fees. So I'll subtract 1,000 from my fees. Maybe Allison will take a big hit of minus 300. And even if someone didn't work on this file, so those are the 4 timekeepers that worked on this invoice that month. Myself, Mike, Allison, and David. Well, maybe I'm going to write off $25 from one of the other attorneys that generally works on the file, but just didn't happen to work on it this month. So all I have to do is add their initials here. Maybe it was Daniel. And even though he didn't work on it this month, I can still write his fees down 25. Nope, thought I put a minus in front of there. Clients do not like it normally when you write them up, so make sure you put in the minus sign. Or I could do vice versa. Maybe I want to give Daniel credit this time. So I'm going to credit him $50, and then I'll take the extra $50 hit. So still is going to, did I do the math wrong? Apparently I did. So the client still only get $10,000 billed in fees, but I got to control whose fees were affected by that write down. And just click OK. And again, you would have to choose a task code, but since I already selected it, it remembers I did the write down. So from this screen, if you want to do a fee reduction, you can control whose fees are reduced during the fee reduction. Now, for those of you that are Canadian clients that charge tax, when you do an adjustment like this, the tax itself will not auto-update. So to make sure you get credit for the reduction, make sure you do the math and reduce the taxes as well, whatever amount that total would be. And of course, if you need to reduce the hard costs or the soft costs, you can. I know normally we don't do that if we can help it because those are expenses, but you can. We just need to know which GL account to write it off to. Usually you have probably a bad debt account. Again, I'm not going to write off any disbursements, so I'll subtract that out. I'm not going to try to figure out the math for the tax. I will leave that and guess $50 off, and then just save your adjustment. Now, what if you want to show the client you did make the adjustment to the invoice and send them an updated invoice? Well, when you make this adjustment, it's not like we can go back and update the actual PDF stored in Soluno with those adjustments. So you basically want to reprint the invoice. And again, we'll do that from here, but we'll go back to request invoice. We'll put in the file. We will select settlement statement. Click on process. And in the settlement statement, you can reprint an invoice. So we just put in that invoice that we did the reduction to, invoice 1841. And what this does is it goes, finds the invoice, but takes a look at any adjustments or write-downs, write-ups, whatever that were done to it in the meantime. It generates a new copy for you to print that shows you those adjustments. And here it comes. And there's the wrote down after discussion with the client. I know this looks funky because I wrote it up, so I might want to show those lines, but we can reprint the invoice with the actual updates from here. So that's another use of the settlement statement, is to reprint an invoice with adjustments on it. Now, if you're a Canadian client, and you could theoretically do this in the US as well, but because we're on a cash accounting system, it probably doesn't come up as often as it would in Canada where you're on accrual accounting. Maybe you know you're not going to get paid on an invoice or two for a file until the following tax year, so you want to write down or provisionally write off those invoices so you don't get charged the extra tax, and then just you'll write them up the following year when you're going to get paid. So we do have a provisional write-off feature. If you don't see this button, your admin can turn it on. It's an admin setting. So maybe I decide on the file I've been working on, 6001, that I'm not going to get paid on that last invoice this year. So I can select that invoice, July one that I just did today, for $17,000, and I can just do provisional write-off. I still have to fill in the codes, write off as bad debt, bad debt disbursement, and I'll write that invoice down to 0 for me. I can put in a note while I'm doing the write-off, the provisional write-off, and then just click Save to do the provisional write-off. Now, if I look at that client's ledger, there was the provisional write-off. Now, just so you're aware, when you do a provisional write-off, if you run an AR report, our default parameters will show this as part of their AR, even though we did a provisional write-off. So if I were to go run my AR report for that client, receivables by client, and we'll use today's date. We'll get rid of that start date for now, and we'll just look at that file. And I run the report. It's going to show me he owes me $69,000. And it's showing me that invoice that I just did for July for $17,000. So if you do provisional write-offs and you don't want those numbers to show up in your AR reports, then when you run an AR report, down at the bottom, there's an option here to treat provisional write-offs as finalized. Tag that box. And then now when you run the report, instead of owing close to $70,000, it'll reduce it now to the $52,000. It'll show that $17,000 invoice as a write-off. So bear that in mind for those of you that want to do your provisional write-offs. If you don't want those numbers reflected in your AR reports, whenever you run an AR report, look for this box to treat provisional write-offs as finalized. Otherwise, instead of $52,000, it's now going to go back up to $69,000. Now, of course, at some point you're going to get paid. You want to be able to apply that money to that invoice. You have to write it back up. It's an easy process. You're still going to come back to this tab, choose that file again. Of course, if you know the invoice number, it'll be much quicker, but I don't ever remember that invoice number. Select that invoice, and as soon as I select it, it'll say, hey, you already have an existing PWO on that. We're going to reverse it. So put the date you want the reversal to take effect. You can put in a note while you're doing the reversal. Click OK, and boom, reversal's done. Nothing else you have to do. Don't have to click Save at the bottom. We did the reversal. I go back to the client ledger. There's the original provisional write-off, and then here's the reversal. So it went down 17,000, and now it's been written back up 17,000. Now I can receive my payment when I get paid. Statements. You want to be able to send out statements to those people who still owe you money, but might not be receiving an invoice. Maybe their file is closed, or at least not closed, but finished, and they still have an outstanding balance. So they're not getting invoices, but we want to remind them they still owe us. That's what we run the statements for. To run your statements, click the down arrow. We have 3 views to choose from. What I normally recommend is run all 3 and decide which one works best for your firm. Probably the majority of people use the first one, unpaid invoices. Put in your parameters. I'll use today's date. This section, ignore contacts invoice within X number of days. So if you do have people that still have outstanding files you're working on and they're getting monthly bills, they might not need a past due notice because they're getting their bill that shows them they're past due. So you can put a number in here, like I ignore anybody that I've billed in the past 30 days because they should have a copy of their balance already. And even down below, I can also tell it ignore files with invoicing request stage. So if I have an invoice in the request stage for them, then they should be getting invoice fairly soon that tells them how much they owe me and what's overdue. And then just run the past due notice. Now, when we run it to the screen like this, we actually kind of squish everything down together to make it easier to read. So you can easily scroll through each one of these and see how much they owe and how much it's overdue. But when you actually go to print these to mail them, each one of these will print on its own page, of course. So you can scroll through and just take a look at, see who owes you and how much they're overdue. Most of mine are old. I got to go through and start making some payments. When you're ready to print, Again, if you want to generate the PDF, just click the PDF icon. Now, this is the only time in Soluno that when you click the PDF icon, instead of just printing outright, it's going to ask you a question. So I click on the PDF icon. It says, okay, well, what if your client is set up to receive emailed copies of their bill? Do you just want to email them a copy of their statement instead of mailing it? So basically, do you want to use your client communication preferences? So if I select yes, and their client is set to receive email copies of the bill, then we will email them a copy of the statement. If they're set to not get email copies of the bill, then we'll generate a PDF for you to mail to the client. And if you do select yes, and you want to email, then you can type in a subject line for those past due emails. This is what I typed in. You can type in whatever you like. And you can also, if anybody on that list is set with carbon copied contacts on their contact or file, so whenever you send them a bill, the CC person gets a copy of the bill. We can also CC the person to get a copy of the past due notice. So if you click yes, we'll follow your billing preferences, your communication preferences. And we'll either email or create a PDF copy of the statement. If you select no, then we'll just create a PDF copy for everybody, and you can mail them all out and not worry about the email. So the email people will get a paper copy to be mailed out. Or, of course, you can cancel the process. So I'll click yes. It will now generate the PDF copies for those people that I'm mailing statements to, and it will generate the email copies for those people that I'm emailing statements to. And here it's popping up the PDF copy. And as you can see, yes, each one is on its own page. Our last tab is the Held Emails tab. Emails will go to this tab for one of two reasons. A, there was a technical issue and we couldn't get the invoice out of the system. If there was, you'll see this last error column. There'll be an error message here if there was. Doesn't look like I had any issues with mine. 9 times out of 10, if there's an error message here, generally the culprit is somebody changed the email password on your email server and didn't update Soluno with the new password. So generally your admins probably just have to go into the admin settings and update the password for your email server and then resend the emails out. Otherwise, the reason you see so many here in mine is because there's a setting in the admin that you can tell it whenever I email something out, have it go to this tab first so I can review it before I send it to the client. Because over here to the right, I can review both the email and the actual attachment. So I can go in. If I want to review the email, just click the email. There we go. It'll show you the body of the email so you can review it, make sure everything looks good. And if you want to see the attachment, you can click the attachment icon and we'll download a copy of the attachment so you can see what that looks like as well. Then once you're happy, just tag the ones you want to go out. And then click process to send them out. If you no longer need to send them out for whatever reason, then you've got the trash can icon and you can just delete them to clean up the queue. You may have noticed there is a send test email button here. There was also one on the release invoice tab and the review charges tab. That way you could test to make sure emails were going out. Just click on send test email. fill in an email address to send it to for testing, and then click OK. And just make sure you get a copy of the email. If you do, then your email service should be good to go, and you can email your bills out, hopefully with no problems. So held emails are going to be here either because there was an issue with the email and there'll be an error here, and it's going to look technical, but 9 times out of 10, it's just updating the password in Soluno for the email server. If it's something else, then by all means contact support. Or it's because you had them sent here automatically to review before you send them to the client. If you have any questions regarding training, always feel free to email us here at training@soluno.legal. Also, you can visit our website at soluno.legal. If you click on the resources tab and go to the training hub, that is where you can sign up for our free webinars. We have recorded versions of these classes out there. We also have mini videos for specific topics on Soluno. And we also have our training documentation out there as well. So you can download PDFs on a few different areas of Soluno. But with that, thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this class helpful. And if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.